So how are you doing? How's everyone doing? Um, Guido, obviously you're under a lot of concern, a lot of internal emotional pressure. Um, how else are you doing? Are you managing to do your inner work, Guido?
If the cancer came back, they had to do surgery again.
Okay.
No, knife, bisturi, knife,
Yeah.
surgery.
But
It's
what about the this gives you an opportunity to really take a measure of where you are in a sense. Are you able to step back into the observer position? Are you able to look at it with a degree of inward detachment? Like this is happening to my body rather than this is happening to me, to be able to sort of separate yourself in any way, or does it just pull you into a state of deep emotional identification? Looks like
I don't
Reggie's
know
running.
what degree. I don't. I don't
Yeah.
know what kind of degree involves the emotion
Yeah.
and with the physical in that condition.
Hey, Reggie,
Maybe
how are you? Reggie just popped in. How are you doing, Reggie?
Good.
Good.
How about you?
Good, good. It looks like you got a nice haircut.
Yeah, it's easier now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Good morning,
Good
everybody.
morning. Ian, how have you been doing with the inner work? Are you still doing the 60 bone exercise and the other ones? And
No, I've had a hard time this week. My energy's been really low, and a lot of heavy emotions
yeah,
going on. Not around anything specific, nothing untoward has happened in my life. Nothing obvious. But it's been a hard week.
yeah. Just emotionally, have you just sort of been in a sort of a discombobulated emotional state? Is there an emotion at the bottom of it?
Yeah, I think it's emotional. It's there's kind of a heaviness, or a sadness, I guess. Heavy isn't really an emotion.
Well, I mean, it is because, if you look at the food diagrams and stuff like that and the table of hydrogens, you realize that some substances are lighter than others. So we can actually talk about heavy emotions. And they are really heavy. They have a heaviness. They're either the level of the earth or they could be the level of the moon. So, compared to the mindful state, the aware state, the personally conscious state, we can have emotions that are sort of two levels below that can really pull us down in terms of our energy, our emotional state, how we are. Can you identify the emotion? It always helps to be able to name the emotion because this is an act of mindful awareness. We've got to detach and hold the emotion, so to speak, and go, what is this that I'm feeling? And when we are able to do that, it allows for a little bit of inner detachment, but just figuring out what the emotion is can be very beneficial in terms of working against it. Have you tried to determine what the emotion is?
I mean, I definitely have tried to hold it, as you say. The naming of it is somewhat difficult. I recognize it more by the sense in the body. The naming is difficult because I seem to be able to label it different ways. So sometimes it feels like a sadness, sometimes it feels like an anger, sometimes it feels more hopelessness or despair.
Are you sure it's a single emotion, or are you going through a range of emotions? I mean, with my clients, one of the things I try to get them to do when I take them back in age regression and, name that feeling and then give it another name and then give it another name. I want them to come up with at least 3 different ways to describe, however they can in the hypnotic state, the emotion that they happen to be feeling at that particular moment when they're back wherever they are, in terms of their memory and their mind. And quite often the names they give, could be synonyms. You could look them up in, online, and they would all be listed as synonyms. And sometimes they're very different. So it really depends on the nature of what you're feeling. Is there a particular place in your body where you notice these emotions, where you feel them?
Yeah, it's definitely central. It normally seems to sit in around the sort of the belly, either like below the solar plexus or the low belly.
Okay.
Kind of down around there.
Where the duodenum is, so just below the stomach?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
It's a little hard to specify,
Yeah.
Here or
You
here
say,
area.
Now, these emotions that you feel, sadness, what other names did you give it? Heaviness?
Yeah, heaviness, kind of a stagnancy or a hopeless, like
Okay.
something can't move out, or there's some kind of energy. It feels like there's some kind of energy that wants to discharge or to be expressed or something.
Is this something that you've experienced many times before, or could it be situational? Is it chronic? As in,
yeah, I would say chronic, just normally not quite so heavy or so loud would be another way to say it. So present.
and you feel it sort of in your lower, or not lower abdomen, but just above the navel, sort of between the solar plexus and the navel, down in that area. I mean, it could be a variant of anxiety. One of the attributes of anxiety is it pulls the flow of blood away from the digestive process, and puts the blood in the big muscles for fighting or running. And so people who do experience anxiety, chronic anxiety, often have stomach problems. But sometimes, when we feel that hopelessness, that despair tinged with anxiety, we feel it in our stomach because there's an issue of blood being pulled away, and there's a physiological process behind that.
It happened to me with the stomach. When I eat something, when I even water, the stomach reaction is immediate.
An anxiety, Guido?
Yeah. When I eat something like water, when I am in deep emotional stress, my stomach reacts like you said just now. Yeah. Exactly. The stomach is the first symptom where you can feel it right direct. When you say name it, I thought I understand that maybe would you say that you can put a name to that kind of thing, but what kind of name, like call it Eric. Oh, that kind of emotion, I call it Eric or John or
well, I mean, putting a name on it is one facet. I also like to engage. I like to engage in synesthesia, which is the overlapping of the senses. And quite often, for my clients, when they're in the hypnosis chair and they're in the state of hypnosis, I will say, if this feeling were a color, what color would it be? If it were a sound, what sound would it be? If it were a smell, what smell would it be? To create this, multifaceted, multi-sensory experience of the feeling. But the most important dimension of it is to really begin to name it, to name the quality. A name is a label that comes from the head brain. It's, part of our associative mind. And you take this label from the associative mind and you put it onto a feeling. but the label is not the feeling, but it's a way to identify the feeling, a way to help us to better understand it. This is why I like at least 3 different labels or 3 different names for the feeling, because then you get it's like triangulation. You can begin to understand it a bit better. So besides that, Ian, so you've just felt a sort of a heaviness, sort of a sadness, a hopelessness throughout the week. And this is a recurrent emotion, something that goes back, that you've experienced many times in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's just, what are you doing here again? And well, I mean, it's good little lessons in particular to try and figure out either what triggered it. Was there a certain situation? Did you have a conversation with someone? Were you looking off into space and suddenly comparing your life with others? Or were you reading the news and, reading about what's going on in your country with your president, and, just the sense of hopelessness? And, what triggers?
Wow.
I'm sorry.
Do you know what triggers it?
Do I know what triggers it? I mean, part of it is definitely the news and the direction the country's going in, my country's going in. But that's also something that I can usually just, to some degree, realize I don't have much control over, and sort of be at peace with that. There's also some stuff in my personal life that is sort of consistently leaving me feeling sort of blocked, the movement forward being blocked. So
yeah, I mean, there was something that an exercise that was given by Alfred Orage, to people when he had the group in New York. This was back in the late 20s to early 30s. And he had people imagine 2 portraits. He had them imagine, going 5 years into the future, and one portrait is of ourselves if we do nothing. If we stay as mechanical as we are, if we stay as broken as we are, basically it's ourself 5 years in the future. And then he had his, the people in his groups imagine themselves sort of as an ideal, what they could be in 5 years. If they worked on themselves, if they went deep into these emotional issues and fixed them and whatever. And so he would get them to hold up these 2 possibilities in their mind. So actually, just give me 1 second. It sounds like Mana's trying to connect with us, but I don't know how she's going to do this.
Messenger. She said she gonna come to you with Messenger.
Okay, I guess I should go. Whoops.
To us.
She's still, for some reason, and there's no coincidence behind it. Zoom doesn't work in Syria, even though it did for a while. Crimea, and Cuba, and I forget, there's one other place, and they're all connected to Russia for some reason. She's I don't have it set up properly for, just give me a second. Let me see if, okay, I don't know how this is working. Aman, can you hear me? It says we're connected, so I guess we can't. Hello, Iman. No, it's not working. She's trying. Let me just give me 1 second, gentlemen.
Listen, I found the stylus, Ian and Don. I found the stylus in my car. I sent it to wash, and I told the guy that washed my car, that look for the stylus, and he found it in the car.
Oh, he found it. Okay.
Oh, that's great, Guido.
Yeah. Reggie, how are you doing with the inner work?
Good. It's good. I mean, I'm working. It is hard. I discovered I can spend a lot more time right here in the present, which is good. I discovered that that I'm in a hurry constantly. I was listening about anxiety, and it's like that. I feel that always, every time. I discovered that I stop my breathing a lot.
You stop your breathing?
Yeah, I stopped breathing. It's amazing how that happens. It's like, oh my God, it's again and again and again.
That's a very interesting observation to realize. Whoops. Any other comments? So you just noticed that you're not breathing. You've suspended your breathing.
Yeah, a lot. It happens a lot to me. I think that's why, I get anxious maybe, because it's I don't have any oxygen, any air, and it happens a lot, really.
Oh my God! Yeah.
So when do you notice this? Do you notice it at particular times?
No, it happens at any time. I have my reminder that you send me, so it's ringing all the time. I try to breathe every time that I hear the I forget the name, the ring. I don't know. It happens all the time. It's constantly. I stop my breathing constantly.
Are there specific events that allow you to stop your breathing? Not allow you, but where you stop breathing.
I mean, I haven't noticed that. Maybe I have to. Oh my God! Sorry about that.
That's okay. I'm trying to just see if we can connect with Iman.
In Skype. If you want to Skype.
So, are you observing yourself more?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, I mean, it's. I use breathing to work, because I think it's at least it's easier for me. It's always there. So yeah, I use it, and it happens a lot.
Yeah, I'm getting. Give me a second. Hello?
Hi, it's for me?
No. I'm just trying to see. I mean, I've connected somehow with the man, but we're not getting.
In Skype. Do you want to do Skype?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've got my Skype here. It says we're connected, but it says we're half. Let me. Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, there, we got her. Can you hear her?
Yeah, she comes through clear.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry for this, like inconvenience, but we don't connect to Zoom here at all.
Yeah, no, I was just saying to them that there's a few places in the world that don't connect to Zoom, and there's kind of connected through Russia. So maybe it's the Russian involvement, what's going on in Syria. I'm not sure. How are you doing, Iman?
I'm okay. I arrived last Sunday in the evening to Syria, and it took me some days, you know, like to restore my strength after the long trip. But I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
I just want to confirm. Can you guys hear her?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
You can.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. I just
Pardon?
wanted to make sure they could hear you, because I've got you right by my microphone.
Yeah.
So the trip here we're talking about is, you know, the Makers of Peace, or whatever, the conference that you attended in Switzerland. So you've just come back from that. How was your Iman? How's your inner work going?
How was my what?
Your inner work. So they're working on yourself.
I did it even though I was there and I was busy. I never missed a day without, you know, like doing it. I think it's helping me. As I said before, it's more and more helping me be a watcher. And the time I watch my action, I feel like that's helping me to manage my reaction. So it's really interesting. And also I feel I think I feel more at ease than before. Yet I need to, you know, like to keep doing that. I think I'm doing I'm doing pretty well. Doing the inner work and the ayah. Interesting. While I'm doing it, I'm focusing. I'm visualizing my bones when I go from, you know, like from the foot to the head. It's interesting how to focus on each part of the body and send it positive energy and the healing. And honestly, I do some prayers as well, where, you know, like I do some prayers for protection and healing. So sometimes it's combined with so many things.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing prayers. I just want you to know that. You know, to do this mindful awareness, as I mean, you know, the holy affirming, holy denying, holy reconciling is a prayer. But I mean, to adapt them, you know, for instance, to your own language, to Arabic, that's perfectly acceptable. You don't have to use the English words, even to come up with your own words. You know, in Islam, you've got 99 names for God. You could begin to incorporate some of those, you know, some in the form of prayer. You know, just to experiment and find what works for you.
True. Yeah, I did that once where I applied the name, the names of God. You know, like I'm talking about one God, but different names, and the names are just quality or description of God. So so it's really interesting, you know, like to apply them to my body. I think I did it for 3 days. I used different names. It's really it's very soothing. I think it makes me feel better. Yeah, thank you.
I'm just gonna see if I can pull something up. I don't know where it is. Years ago, I mean, there was a discovery in Nag Hammadi in northern Egypt, where they discovered what they call the Nag Hammadi library, a set of Gnostic texts. So these were early Christians. It was a different form of Christianity. And within the Gnostic tradition, I came across a section in the Nag Hammadi library where it was a mindfulness exercise, a profound mindful exercise. I'm not sure. Yeah. Let me just give me a second. I can pull it up now. I've got it here. Let me just
mindfulness exercise.
Crease it.
Yeah.
So when I read it, I read this ancient mindful exercise. I'm not sure. Here, let me pull this up. Share screen. Yeah. This is on my, okay. So the Apocryphon of John, the Nag Hammadi library, this was a self-sensing exercise. And one of the things I loved about it, so I wrote here is an ancient 2nd century AD. Let me magnify this a little bit more. Here is a 2nd century AD Gnostic Christian self-sensing exercise. And, you know, in it I have capitalized the appropriate words. And as you read it, you know, imagine that you are a 2nd century Gnostic Christian being read the story behind the development of your body, how your body was fashioned by various angels and archangels and powers that be. Imagine sensing the wonder and mystery as you are led through this mindful self-sensing exercise. And as you read it, try to actively sense the various levels and parts of your body. So let's do this now. Let's just take a moment to become aware of our body. Take a moment and sense our body, to sense the effect of gravity on our body, to sense the sensation of balance, temperature, air pressure, to become aware of the sensation of the touch of clothing on our body, the air that touches our skin, to become aware of our breath and our breathing, just to take a moment and ground ourselves in the awareness of our physical body, in our breath and breathing. And then, you know, when I come to the words that I've put into uppercase, try to become aware of them. So I'm just going to read this, and you know, this will be our exercise for today. The powers began. The first one, goodness, created a bone soul. The second, foreknowledge, created a sinew soul. And the third, divinity, created a flesh soul. So as I said, bone soul, I hope you became aware of your bones. The sinew soul, to become aware of your sinew. The flesh soul, to become aware of your flesh. And the fourth, the lordship, created a marrow soul. The fifth, kingdom, created a blood soul. The sixth, envy, created a skin soul. The seventh, understanding, created a hair soul. And the multitude of the angels attended him, and they received from the powers the 7 substances of the natural form, in order to create the proportions of the limbs and the proportion of the rump and the proper working together of each part. The first one began to create the head. I'm not going to be able to pronounce this properly. Etiraphaiopi Abron. Either an angel or an archangel created his head. Menigastroth created the brain. Astereshmi, the right eye. Daspomosha, the left eye. Actually, I'm going to ignore these names. So just focus on your head. And then imagine, you know, that there's some kind of angel or archangel that created your brain. And then become aware that some kind of divine being created your right eye, your left eye, your right ear, your left ear, the nose, the lips, the teeth, the molars. If you have tonsils, try to sense your tonsils. The uvula is a little flap in the back of our throat that helps us to speak. The neck, the vertebrae, the throat, the right shoulder, the left shoulder, the right elbow, the left elbow, the right underarm, the left underarm, the right hand, the left hand, the fingers of the right hand, the fingers of the left hand, the nails of the hands, the right breast, the left breast, the right shoulder joint, the left shoulder joint, and all of these areas are connected to some kind of angelic being, some kind of higher entity that helped to bring them into existence. The belly, the navel, the abdomen, the right ribs, the left ribs, the right hip, the left hip, the marrow, the bones, the stomach, the heart, the lungs, the liver, the spleen, the intestines, the kidneys, the sinews, the spine, the veins, the arteries, all the flesh. I'm going to skip the next little bit just because the right buttock, then we'll go to the right thigh, the left thigh, the kidneys, the right leg, the left kidney, the left leg, the right shin bone, the left shin bone, the right knee, the left knee, the right foot, the toes of the right foot, the left foot, its toes, the nails of the feet. And you know, I'll read this next part. And those who were appointed over all of these are Zathos, Armus, Kalila, Jabel, Saboeth, Cain, Abel, and those who are particularly active in the limbs, the head, the neck, the right shoulder, the left shoulder, the right hand, the left hand, the fingers of the right hand, the fingers of the left hand, the right breast, the left breast, the chest, the right shoulder, the right shoulder joint, the left shoulder joint, the right ribs, the left ribs, the belly, the womb for women, the right thigh, sorry, the spelling's a little bit off in this, the left thigh, the genitals, the right leg, the left leg, the right shin bone, the left shin bone, the right knee, the left knee, the right foot's toes, the left foot and its toes. Let me just stop that. So, I mean, this is an ancient 2,000-year-old self-sensing exercise where each particular part of the body is linked to some kind of a divine being, some kind of an angel, some kind of a being from the angelic realm, or even potentially some kind of an archangel. And even though, you know, we've lost the connection to, you know, this Gnostic past, because a lot of those angelic beings that they talk about, we've never heard, and there are no other references to them in other holy scriptures and texts. But just to imagine, you know, thinking that my right knee, you know, partly was helped, you know, fashioned by a specific being, and my left knee by another being, and my right shin by another being, and my left shin by another being, and that everything about me was composed by these higher order beings, that there was somehow brought into manifestation and to recognize the divinity and the sanctity of our body, the connection with those higher realities. So, you know, there's many different ways we can play with a lot of these exercises to become aware of ourself. Coming back to, you know, the earlier conversation that I had with you, Guido, in particular, I don't know if any of you have really plumbed the depths of the G.I. Gurdjieff Paris meetings 1943. But in there, there's an exercise that I've never come across. I come across a partial bit of it through Joseph Aziz and Mr. Gurdjieff's 4 ideals, where he wanted us to connect with certain ideals in the universe, idyllic beings, you know, such as Jesus, Mohammed, Buddha, and Lama were the ones that he recommended. But throughout that book, he talks about the separation exercise. He doesn't give a real detailed a description of it, but at one point he talks about the fact that he developed his own little exercise to get members who were in his group in Paris during the war years to begin to separate themselves from themselves. And the purpose of this exercise was to become aware, to be able to separate ourselves from our bodies. So he would have, so, you know, you would sit in a room, preferably quietly by yourself. And then he would have you imagine yourself. Imagine looking at yourself from another chair in the room. So in actual physical separation. And I'm going to get this wrong because I don't have it written down in front of me, but he had people, the little bit that he improvised, he had them in one situation to imagine themselves hot, and then to be and imagine themselves in another chair looking back at their physical body and imagine they're cold, and then move to a third point in the room and imagine looking back at their physical body, but in that third point, imagining themselves crying. This is something that's not out there in the Gurdjieff teachings. You know, he talks about the need to develop the higher being bodies. And I've gone through this in, you know, previous talks. Let me just pull the best representation of this up and get it on the screen. So Mr. Gurdjieff talked about the need to develop, to grow our being. So on the screen, on the left side, I've talked about this a bit. That's normal man in waking sleep, And this is the level of personal consciousness. This is the growth of our astral self, the growth of the Kesdjan body in the middle. And this is where the separation comes in. We can separate this dimension of our being from our physical body when we grow it properly. So in that book, the transcripts of those meetings, he's been working with a lot of the students there for 3 or 4 years, some of them since before the war. And the meetings were, notes taken in 1943. So some of these people had substantial experience with Mr. Gurdjieff, meeting him weekly or, bi-weekly, going to his place, being members of groups, being members of Madame de Salzman's group. And the idea through the breathing exercises, through the various inner work that we've talked about so far up to this point, what we're trying to do is we're trying to allow the emanations to settle within us and to grow ourselves at a higher level. So this middle, the first conscious shock, represents the growth of the Kesdjan body, what some people would call the astral body. Mr. Gurdjieff didn't like to use the term astral because it had so many connotations and so many ill-formed meanings that were imposed on it that he preferred to come up with a separate term so that it didn't lead to a lot of confusion. But this crystallization of a higher self, and then of the crystallization of an even higher self, which we see over on the right-hand side, the second conscious shock. This is well beyond where we really should be talking about the second conscious shock. It's the first conscious shock we should be focusing on, the development of the Kesdjan body. So the breathing exercise, breathing in and then imagining something stays as we breathe out, seeding ourselves with the higher carbons needed in order for the growth and development of our being to continue at a higher level, to overcome the C point and the me points in the normal octaves. So as we grow something, this is not part of the physical body. Let me just get back off this. So as we grow ourself at the higher level, we are growing something within ourselves. But this something that we grow within ourselves can also separate from the physical body. It's like our physical body, and I mentioned this last week. It's like the physical self is like the womb in which the emotional and the intellectual, the higher being bodies grow within us. Last week I referenced, let me see if I can pull this up quickly. I referenced something that was given out in the Willem Nyland group, which I can just pull up right now. A way of understanding the growth of our being. So this was given out in a Willem Nyland group. Actually, this was given to me by a member of the Willem Nyland group, and he said it was distorted, but it's not distorted. Someone went to a Willem Nyland group, and then they went home and they created this diagram based on what they had said in the group. Whoops, let me bring it back up again a little bit more. So the bottom triangle is what we are born with. So the sort of purplish kind of, this is humanity as we are born. That's the diagram on the left. We are born with half the octave of air. We're born with a full body, even though we're born babies. If we eat, if we breathe, if we live, we're going to grow into fully functional adult beings with adult bodies. At birth, that's given. We're only born with half the emotional center. And this is the Kesdjan body. This is the representation of the Kesdjan body growth within ourselves. So we're, the way I like to say it is, we're born fully formed physically, emotionally, at the emotional center in the Kesdjan body. It is like we are born a 26-week-old fetus. So 26 weeks, it's not viable. It's got to get to about 32 weeks for the fetus to be viable outside the womb. But it's, you know, fairly well developed at that point. But it needs the body, and it needs to be in the body in order to continue the growth. And then our higher being body, the intellectual body, the one we're not even talking about because it's so far beyond us. It's like when we are born with that, just, you know, like a zygote, where you have the fusion of, you know, your father's DNA and your mother's DNA, and together, you know, they become just a tiny little unit, what they call the zygote, which would not live and have no possibility of living outside of the womb. So in one way, we're born fully developed. In another way, we're born half developed. And in another way, we're born embryonic. And it's the development of these higher selves within us that leads to this. So the development of the Kesdjan body, the breathing in exercises, the atmosphere exercises, you know, the things that I've talked about before, they're all designed to grow the Kesdjan body. Now we've also, as I talked about last week, the problematic nature of C12 causes sort of deformations within ourselves. C12 is the highest body naturally produced by the human body. Let me just, let me just see if I can bring that up. So in this diagram, you can see over on the left side, the state of waking sleep, the natural person. The highest that we naturally produce is C12. And C12 can be siphoned away by the intellectual center, siphoned away by the emotional center. And when it does, it leads to malformations, you know, improper crystallizations within ourselves at those higher levels. And so it's very important for us to begin to decrystallize some of those malformations. And that's where working on emotions and things like that become very important. So we grow ourselves, we grow this higher level of our being. And people have often asked Mr. Gurdjieff, how do I know if I have a higher being body? And he, you know, in terms of the literature that I'd come across before, he had kind of brushed it off. And for some of them, he implied that it just doesn't matter that you know, I'm telling you that you have one. But this was an exercise, the separation exercise, realizing that we have a physical body, but we're not our physical body. And as we grow the higher being body, or not the higher being body, but as we grow the Kesdjan body, and Bennett identified the Kesdjan body, he called it the vessel for the energies of the soul. So the Kesdjan body is really more like growing a container. It's like growing, it's a word I just can't.
Feeling a body or something empty or feeling.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Kesdjan body, not you know, growing a crucible, so to speak, growing a container that we can then begin to work with the energies of the soul, which are the higher energies. But just growing the Kesdjan body, developing the Kesdjan body, we create something inside us that has a greater permanence than the physical body, so that when we leave the physical body behind, we have the Kesdjan body. We've got that crystallized and developed within us. And he talked about how that is the vehicle for transcending, you know, the death of our physical body. But these exercises, to have yourself sitting in a chair and imagine yourself looking at yourself from another chair in the room, and to get to the point, and it seems like with the questions that he asked the people who were doing these exercises, it was to really come to the awareness and to to prove to themselves that they were more than their physical body. That when you have grown this other level of your being, when you grow in the Kesdjan body, that you can actually look upon the physical body. You can interact with the physical body. You can step outside the physical body. There are all sorts of potential ramifications to this. One of the most interesting episodes or segments in Search of the Miraculous is where Uspensky seemed to have this non-physical contact with Mr. Gurdjieff, that Mr. Gurdjieff wasn't physically present, and yet he felt Mr. Gurdjieff's real presence there with him. Mr. Gurdjieff was obviously doing that, by the separation of himself from himself, using that at a very advanced level. But when you begin to work through the ramifications of that possibility, inner circle of humanity, connecting with teachers, all of these other things begin to seem a lot less fanciful. And, if we can do this in the non-physical realm. But the goal is to grow the Kesdjan body to the point where we have this capability, this awareness, this understanding. And this is why I brought it back to you, Guido. With the bad news and the pain that you have in your throat and the fear, all of the work that you've done since 1977 or 1979, work on ourselves, development on ourselves, that kind of work is never lost. We may forget about it, we may push it into the background, we may have quite a few wilderness years where we don't appear to be working on ourselves, but we are creating something. We are creating something that has a permanence, that really has a reality that transcends this physical world. But the interesting thing is it's being embodied. It's being in the body. It's allowing this physical sheath, so to speak, like a womb that allows these inner parts of ourself to develop. And this is where it actually gets close to Sufism, because Sufism, they talk about the inner gardens and they talk about levels of being and they talk about developing these refined aspects of ourself. But I think that this is part of all the ancient traditions. You find echoes within Hinduism. You find echoes in certain other teachings that, we are attempting to create something permanent, something more solid within ourselves. So, all of the exercises, all of the teachings, they're really all designed to help us get to this level of awareness. And I'm going to pull this back up again and focus a bit slightly on it. So everything within ourselves. These diagrams at the top are incomplete. And the reason I say they're incomplete is a man walks along a path and he comes across a beach of golden sand. And rather than jumping in the water and swimming around, he reaches into his backpack and he takes out a pan. And he begins to use the water and various different things, and he begins to pan or sift for gold. Now, he's not creating gold. He's not materializing gold. What he's doing is he's separating the gold from the sand. And so at a certain point, he will end up with a pile of gold and a pile of sand. And this is the alchemical process. Every refinement up leads to something else. Let me, I can pull this up actually. Can you see this? Is this coming up on the screen? The first rule? Or
no, we've still got the alchemy of human transformation.
Okay, I've got to figure out how to. I know someone who did that. They were able to go from picture to picture. So feeding and being fed, the transformation of energies. The first rule: the higher blends with the lower to meet in the middle. I've got that diagrammed on the side. Sorry you can't see this, Aman, but the higher blends with the lower to meet in the middle. So the positive and the negative lead to the reconciling or the equalizing. The food diagram, the same food diagram I talked about before with C12, which is right here at the top, I've re-represented just as a way of the higher 192 blends with 768 to make 384, which then becomes the next lower that blends with 96. And there's this whole process. So in the refining up, the middle becomes the lower for the next level. So we've got it, food enters the mouth and meets with the saliva and the grinding of the teeth and is blended into the chewed food that enters the stomach. And in the stomach, it meets with the gastric juices. So this is the first rule, the higher blends with the lower. Let me get rid of this. And I'll bring up the second rule, if I can find it. Okay. So the second rule, and I think we've lost him on, feeding and being fed, the transformation of energies. The second rule, when the higher blends with the lower and creates one result, it also creates the opposite. So here we're talking about, as it creates a pile of gold, it creates a pile of sand. Or on the diagram here, the farmer, the wind, the harvest, it creates wheat and then the chaff. So something, and this is one of the parts that a lot of people get messed up with in Beelzebub Tales when he says, something that creates one thing must create its opposite. So if something creates light, it must also create dark. So something is transformed up and something is transformed down. And let me go back to now. So this diagram here is incomplete. This is just showing the positive upward movement of the various elements. Mr. Gurdjieff said if something doesn't evolve up, it begins to evolve down. So we can go in the octave of air, which represents the emotions over on the left side where my cursor is, do, re, mi. And at the level of mi, the octave of air requires some kind of outside force, some kind of outside shock in order for it in the middle diagram to continue up. But if it doesn't receive that, it then begins to degenerate and it then begins to evolve downwards. So this is where the dark emotions come in. This is where some of the dark feeling states we experience come in. And within the whole alchemy of human transformation, as I said, this is a very limited representation because it's only showing what is going up in that upward movements. It could be redone to show downward movements, to show cross movements. But basically what I'm saying is that anything that we experience, anything such as the sensation of the touch of clothing on our body, or the awareness of an emotion that we are experiencing, or a thought in our head brain, all of these can be represented on this chart and can be understood in terms of energy, in terms of molecules, in terms of experiences. So this is not just a map, a blueprint of our potential evolution. For instance, Mr. Gurdjieff said that the intellectual center works with hydrogen-48. It's actually a very low center. So we can, on the left side, the level of vertebrates, the number 48 is highlighted, and then DO 48. So that means, for instance, that our thoughts can be our thoughts are fairly heavy. Now he talks about the fact that our emotional center works with hydrogen 24. This is where we move more over to the center diagrams, but we can find the level of 24. We can find, over on the left, there's a Fa 24 that seems to connect with it. Over on the right, yeah, Fa 24. So we can begin to plug in the different variables within ourselves to see where they fit within these diagrams. But these diagrams, they're showing us the proper work, the proper way that we begin to evolve, that we begin to grow. Now here on the bottom left, Mr. Gurdjieff also said that we are 3-story beings. We have a higher level, a regular level, and a lower level. I like to think of it as a basement, a ground floor, and an upper floor. And for someone at the level of waking sleep, mechanical man, their lowest level is 96, which is the realm of the moon. These are the homicidal emotions where you lose it, the road rage, a lot of the anger and things that we feel. A normal man, at the highest, they can exist and experience the mindful state. But another metaphor I use is that the mindful state is like, 3 separate lights on the higher floor. And because of the wasted energy that we waste on the basement and the lower floor, we're rarely able to light those lights. So most people do not experience a lot of moments of mindful awareness. But as we begin to work on ourselves, as we begin to find our weaknesses, as we begin to find those wobbles, where are our emotional problems? What kind of pain do we feel? What kind of an emotional issues cloud our thoughts? What stops us from being present here in the moment? Georgia D, the 7 qualities or characteristics of sleep, and I never remember them all, but he talked about formatory thinking, identification, internal considering, negative emotions, lying. Those are the main ones, but there are a couple more. And so those are the things that keep us sort of over in the left. But as we move up, as we grow a Keshan body, it's like we shift up a whole order of being so that our basement then becomes the habitual mechanical level. Our normal level of awareness then is the level of mindful awareness. And at our peak, we can actually tap into the solar level. We can tap into the level of the real I. In order to sense your hands, in order to become aware of the flesh and bones in your hands, your fingers, a tiny little bit of C12 has to be present in that alchemical process. To be aware of your body, to sense your body, to any kind of mindful awareness necessitates that higher element being present. And if you can sustain or maintain those levels of higher mindful awareness, it's because you don't have those initial chemicals that you need inside yourself for this alchemical, these higher alchemical processes. And this is what a lot of the inner work is doing. It's bringing those elements within us. It's sort of like dusting ourselves at a higher level. So there's a movement up. The conscious man, they are centered at level 12, which is the real I. At their basement, they're into the mindful awareness, the mindful level. And at their highest, they begin to tap into the lowest level of the Godhead, all sons. So this is sort of the journey that we are making. And to understand, I mean, to me, when people talk about Mr. Gurdjieff having invented these teachings, he went here and took a bit of this, and he went there and took a bit of that. I see these teachings all intersecting through this ancient science of human transformation. Mr. Gurdjieff did not make this up. He learned this somewhere. I believe that this is the remnant of an ancient science that was much greater developed, thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of years ago. But this is what has come down to us, and this is what he released into the West. this tiny fragment of what would have been an immense ancient teaching. But this fragment really represents our journey. If we had to save any fragment, if we had to keep any part of that massive teaching alive, it would be this tiny little remnant. Because to figure this out, to recreate this, to go through all of this on our own would take hundreds and maybe thousands of years of development. Mr. Gurdjieff implied that, you know, the society of Al-Khaldans in a previous, you know, antediluvian civilization took at least 800 years to develop to this level of understanding. So we've kind of got, you know, sort of a tiny snapshot, but I think it's the most important snapshot. And as I said, I believe that the entire teachings are all connected to these diagrams. They're connected to this ancient science, this ancient understanding. So to sort of step back into the teachings, to step into these diagrams, to step back into these teachings, to step into these diagrams and understand those connections, that what we are doing is we are really growing our being. Let me just stop sharing this so that we're all back again. So it's an immense journey. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of work to really begin to grow ourselves at this level. And here it's interesting. Mr. Gurdjieff said that, you know, organic life is the evolving part of this planet. And humanity is the evolving part of organic life. And within humanity, there is an evolving part. And if that part stops evolving, it affects humanity, and it affects organic life, and it affects the planet. And it's not a huge percentage that of humanity that needs to be evolving. It's a small percentage, a small number of us. Mr. Gurdjieff said that quality and the quality of our vibrations is far more important than the quantity, the number of people producing these vibrations. So back in 1915, when there were 2 billion people in the world, Mr. Gurdjieff told P.D. Uspensky that 200 conscious individuals, and he put this phrase in deliberately, if they wanted to, could alter the history of this planet. So where are they? Why aren't they altering the history of this planet? I think part of it is, you know, we're responsible ourselves to try to grow our beings to this level, to try to get to this place where we can be so centered in our energy that we can begin to have positive effects on other people. My view of the problem with this planet is that the higher levels of humanity have been kind of knocked off, and we have to regrow them. 200 years ago, and some of you have heard me say this a number of times, 200 years ago we had these immense places of luminescence, of energies. We had these hermitages and monasteries in Central Asia that were thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of years old. We had the whole Forbidden Kingdom in Tibet. It was, you know, priestly, meditative, spiritual, you know, government. You know, then the Chinese came in, I think it was, you know, 1949 or 50, and they began the invasion of Tibet. The Taliban, the warlords, the roughening and coarsening of what was going on in the Middle East. You know, up until 100 years ago, you know, there were elements in the Middle East that were incredibly refined teachings. But then someone comes along with an AK-47 and says, no, this is what we believe, and kills anyone or exiles them or sends them away. You know, it can lead to all sorts of things. Here, J.G. Bennett talked about the Masters of Wisdom, and he said that whenever there was a massive invasion, a third of them went underground, a third of them stayed in the open, and a third of them went into exile. And he talked about the Masters of Wisdom. And so the ones who went underground tried to keep the teachings as they were. The ones who remained visible tried to adapt the teachings to what the invaders believed, and the ones who went away in exile tried to keep the teachings preserved absolutely, in their pristine form. But he talked about this went on over and over and over again. Also, a couple hundred years ago, Ethiopia and various other places were really luminous sources of light. And, they've all been darkened now. And they've all been darkened because of maternity, because of, the rise of the industrial civilization and armaments and AK-47s. And now, just one person with a gun can kill an entire village. Just by squeezing a finger, and all of the knowledge, all of the wisdom, all of the higher learning and everything, they don't see any value in that. And as a matter of fact, they are threatened by it. So it's like humanity has lost its top, and we have to grow it. We have to try, and each of us individually, and not just Gurdjieffians, Buddhists, esoteric Christians, Hindus, people on the mystical path, we have to begin to try to grow these higher connections, to make these higher connections. So in one sense, a lot of the Tibetan lamas coming over to North America and setting up, I don't know what we would call them, setting up monasteries, setting up little pockets, trying to regrow some of their lost wisdom. All of these things are all sort of contributing this growth, this development. At any rate, I've talked long enough. Any questions? Any comments?
Alan, would you please say, when you mentioned the caption body, the word caption, I can get it, spell it for me for free. Caption body, caption.
Oh, Keshin body. Yeah.
Caption, G-A-S.
It's, here, let me, it's in Tales. It's found throughout Tales. Keshin body. Just give me a sec. And for anyone else who may be interested, that's how you spell it, Kesjin, Kesdjian. And I mean, this is the word that he uses in Tales more than anywhere else. But the Kesjin body. So yeah. Any other questions? I'll get it bigger there. Kesjin body. For those who are watching on the screen. Any other questions? Any comments? I mean, within the, for instance, within the Kabbalistic, esoteric, Judaic system, they talk about how we have a soul at one level, the potential for a soul at another level, and the potential for a soul at another level. The level that we have a soul at is the level that's common to all life. They call it nefesh. But nefesh also means to breathe. It means spirit. It means soul. It's been translated with all these different things. But nefesh is the self in world 48. Then with the development of the bones, we can develop this aspect of ourself called ruach, which is the equivalent of the Kesjin body. It's the equivalent of ourselves at the astral level. Then we can actually develop what they call neshama, which is like the spirit. It's a much higher soul, and that's like the higher being body. That's like the higher self. Now, I mean, these terms can be, you can find them in Hinduism, you can find them in other traditions. This belief that we can grow something within ourselves. It's there also in Sufism. Sufism, they talk about the different levels of realities, the different gardens within ourselves, but there's a direct one-to-one relationship. Within St. Paul, he talked about soma, psyche, pneuma. Soma was the Greek word that was the equivalent of nefesh. Psyche was the Greek word that was the equivalent of ruach in Hebrew. And pneuma was the equivalent of the word neshama. These representing, body, spirit, and soul, so to speak. The psyche, and whenever Mr. Gurdjieff uses the word psyche, he uses it in this specific context. He doesn't, say it's World 24 and all of that, but he's a Greek. He understands. He talks about organic, psychic, and willful. Soma, psyche, pneuma. These three different levels, these three different parts of our being, to grow ourselves at the higher level. So when St. Paul was talking about soma, psyche, pneuma, he also talked about, carnal man, natural man, and spiritual man. Carnal man is just the mechanical man. Natural man, where we should be, the level we should be, is mindful man. It's the Kesjan body, it's the growth of the astral body, it's the growth of that higher part within us. And then he talked about the spiritualized man, the fully grown, the three different levels of humanity. I found this in the Bhagavad Gita, but I would have to go back and read the Gita in order to speak really knowledgeably about it. But they talk about the three worlds, the three levels. So this is found in many different traditions, this understanding that there isn't just one form of humanity. There are three forms of humanity. And there's the one form of humanity. We're all born in that. And then we ourselves have to evolve the higher form within ourselves, and then the even higher form within ourselves. So that the future evolution of humanity is not a mass evolution. It's an individual evolution. It's something we can work on right here and now by growing ourselves at these higher levels. So we have to figure out, well, what is the nature of this growth of ourself at these higher levels? And then what is it that's inhibiting this growth? And here, self-study, self-observation become very important. Really looking at ourselves and analyzing ourselves. So Ian, when you were talking earlier about the sadness, the hopelessness that you sometimes get overwhelmed with, this is obviously part of a degenerative, not like, oh, that degenerative youth. It's just a devolving octave. It's not without any kind of moral dimension, but somehow throughout your life, going back most likely, as we've talked about before, to your childhood, this feeling came along, and this feeling has crystallized within you. And there's an actual substance within you that's created with this heavy feeling. It's like you've got this crystallization within you. So it's like this wobble, it's kind of holding you down. And it's sort of like a malformed growth at a lower level. And so not only do we have to figure out how to evolve up, how to take those upward steps, we've got to really begin to look within ourselves, to study ourselves, to find out where we've made downward steps, where we've created wobbles within ourselves, and we've got to begin to figure out how to fix them or how to decrystallize them. Here, being a hypnotherapist, people that I see in flesh and blood, I can really help them a lot more than I can say with Zoom and through the internet, because my specialization really is repairing the past, finding these wobbles, these crystallizations within ourselves and really working to bring them into our surface awareness. And that's the most important part. You know, once you begin to realize, like say, Ian, you use the word sadness, hopelessness. There was another word I forget now. Anger. Once you begin to taste this, you're already beginning to dissolve it, to figure out where it came from, to figure its manifestations in your life, to begin to act opposite to it. So, for instance, if you feel a sadness, a hopelessness, to just go outside and walk down the street, swinging your arms, acting in the opposite fashion, will help to grow yourself in the right direction. So, you know, these are very involved teachings in some ways, but in other ways, they're very simple because, you know, it's where am I broken? And that requires a lot of self-observation. It requires looking in. Any questions, any comments? Hope we're sensing our body, aware of our breath, aware of the touch of clothing on ourselves, the sensation of our feet. Always, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, if you can bring your awareness back into your body, you should give yourself a little gold star kind of thing. Every time we do that, we are actually leaving behind a proper impression, a proper crystallization within us. So we've got to leave behind these proper crystallizations, and we've got to dissolve these improper crystallizations, and we've got to do a lot of inner work on ourselves. But it's, you know, a lot of people, they come to the Gurdjieff teachings. I remember myself back in 1981, just like, it's just so much, and where does it all fit together? And it's taken a long time to begin to sort pieces and connect through to them and things like that. But comment. Ian.
I don't know. It's you know, there's so many connections that you bring out in these talks. I feel them kind of lighting up and coming together, but the questions are difficult to arrive at so quickly.
Yeah.
I do have a question on something else, if
Sure.
I may.
Yeah.
We had talked, I think it was last week or maybe the week before, about the exercise where you hold your arms out.
Yeah.
And the vibration in the solar plexus.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of forgot this when you had asked earlier, but when we were talking, it came up while you were talking. I was wondering about the nature of the vibration. I've had it happen a few times where the muscles actually will vibrate, and the breathing speeds up in response, like it's a diaphragm kind of vibration. But I don't know if that's at all
well, I mean, you know, how long have you done it? 6 minutes?
The most I've held it was, I think, a little over 5 minutes.
Okay. I mean, the back in 2004, 2005, I was doing certain inner exercises that I was creating for myself. And at one point I began to feel this vibration coming up from, it seemed like in my stomach, deeper than my stomach. And it led to a degree of luminosity around, and I did a lot of experimenting with it. And then I came across Mr. Gurdjieff recommending holding the arms out. And when I held the arms out, I noticed that when it got to sort of the last minute or two, when it was really hard on me, I felt what I felt in my stomach at that point was identical to what I felt with the reverberations. And so it's only my personal experience that I'm connecting the two of them. I've never come across anyone who has connected the two of them. This is what I personally experienced. I felt they're the exact same thing. So what I've told people since then is to pay attention when you hold your arms out and you get to that point. It's more than physical. It's something else that's coming up, because I could get to the point where I could do it lying down and I could feel these reverberations coming up. And he talks very specifically about them in the third series. I don't want to go over to overtime today, but in the third series, Life is Only Real, Then When I Am, you know, I think it's chapter 5 or the 5th talk, where he actually talks about the reverberations. Yeah, it's the 5th talk. I won't bring it up on the screen because we don't have a lot of time.
Yes, I have read the book a few times, so
yeah.
I know the reference. I couldn't quote it or anything, but I know the reference.
Well, it's the 5th talk, and he tells people to imagine it. And he says he normally doesn't like to tell people to imagine things because that leads to fantasy. But this is one exercise where he told people to imagine things. But if you hold your arms out and you begin to experience that at the last bit, and you can take away sort of the physical pressure of it, and you can become aware of what that is, you can then begin to imagine that exercise a lot more real than if you just simply imagine it. Something grows there, something connects there, some kind of vibration, some kind of power. And holding the arms out gives you the taste, just a taste of that. But the ultimate goal is to do that without holding the arms out. It was just something I noticed when I did that. Hey, wow, this is the same experience. So it's a way to kickstart the awareness of what that actual exercise is talking about.
And in the experience you're speaking of, that at least that you had, is you said it's more than just like a physical, muscular.
Well, it wasn't physical and muscular, but it feels physical. It doesn't feel muscular. It feels almost like this reverberation, an engine in your diaphragm that.
That's enough. Thank you. I don't want to get too much of an idea about what I should be feeling, but just a little clarification. And that
I mean, the best way to get an idea is to hold your arms out as long as you can and pay attention to the last minute. That's the best. That way you'll get an actual glimpse of it, a feeling of it, a sensation of it. Okay, so thank you all for coming. I'm going to try and contact you throughout the week. I've kind of taken the last week off. You may have noticed on Facebook. I just haven't been posting. I'll probably start posting again tomorrow. I've been posting every day, multiple posts for 2 years now. I wasn't intending to take a week off, but it just happened. So if you've been wondering about my posts, it's just I just wanted a break. It's summertime, beautiful weather. Okay, thank you all for joining me. Take care, and we'll talk next week. The breathing exercise, breathing in those active elements, the collective state exercise, doing the inner work, walking, keep that all up. Grow those things within yourself, and also pay attention to what within you fights this process, the obstacles within yourself, those feelings like hopelessness and whatever. Okay, have a good day. Have hopefully a wonderful rest of your Sunday. Bye now.